Good morning again, everyone. Thank you for coming out to the, I guess this would be the fourth annual informational session, the fiscal year 2018 budget. Thank you all for being here. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Rashawn Howard. I'm the budget director for the county executive. Today's informational session is to kind of do a little bit more detailed level in what Larry presented last week at the board meeting to kind of get you familiar with what's in the budget. So we'll do some flipping through. Lana has passed out some Post-it notes for you to kind of, have some place markers. And what I would like to do is at the end, if there's any questions that I can answer today, is to do a Q&A at the end, and then any more in-depth questions, have you send in a list of questions to the county board staff so that I can get your questions answered.
I have an item I want to bring up that we won't talk about probably now, but this is the Finance Committee problem. We need to move to the Finance Committee an agenda item to charge the state of Illinois an origination fee for all the money that they take in the form of their administration fee.
Okay.
Because the taxes originate out of here, so that changes the budget.
All right, so Steve, I think your concern would be addressed with
But I mean,
the Finance Committee chair.
We move that, take.
That's something that you could discuss, with him. This is, this is just the
I
workshop.
thought we could do that now, I'm sorry.
No problem. So that everyone can be familiar with what's in the budget. Okay. So everyone should have a presentation handout, and I will be flipping through that and then also referring to the budget book. So the first page is the proposed fiscal year 2018 budget. The budget does reflect the impact from the state's budget. The total county budget is $551 million. Of that, $197 million is found in the corporate fund, and $354 million is found in the special funds. The next page. In the corporate fund, the $197 million, which is found on page 134 of your budget book, reflects a net decrease of $600,000 or 0.3% from 2017. So again, the corporate fund can be found on page 134, and it reflects a net decrease of $600,000. So if you want to put your tab there, and that's a roll-up of the expenses. Then on the following page, I just wanted to highlight the impact of the state budget to the county. So we talked about, or Larry had mentioned, some of the, what we would realize as far as reductions. One of the items was a 10% reduction in the local distributed fund. And what that actually amounts to is approximately $1 million, and that's based on an estimate of our 2017 actual, less 10%. The other item is a decrease in our personal property replacement tax. That's approximately $200,000, and that's the portion that's allocated to the corporate fund. So of that calculation, or the the replacement tax. There's a portion that goes to FICA, there's also a portion that goes to IMRF, and then then there's a portion that goes to the corporate fund. So the portion that goes to the corporate fund, the difference is about $200,000. And then the new 2% administrative fee on sales tax in the RTA fund, that's approximately about $470,000. And that's not on the sales tax in the corporate fund. So on the sales tax in the RTA fund, the state implemented a new surcharge of 2% on that, on the sales tax.
State takes on the RTA tax, it's just like out of 100%, we only get, what, 10% or 15%?
Repeat that question?
On the RTA tax. Say the total amount was $100. The state gets 20-something, $80, we get $20 without the 2%.
I think that's currently, but I'd have to double check that to see what the current
Could you let me
percentage
know
is
what
that
the
we're,
exact
that we're receiving
percentage
now.
of the breakdown is?
Yeah.
Can I just clarify what he said?
Sure.
I think what you're getting at is the county receives 1/4% for the RTA tax, but what they're doing is they're saying of the total funds that we receive, they're taking a 2% administrative fee from, what would be our proceeds. So we would get 98% of what we would have gotten in the previous year.
Right, so they're cutting the...
They're taking a 2% fee from the dollars that we receive via the RTA tax.
So in dollars, then...
Well, in total dollars, if you use last year's figures, Rashawn
Let's-
has it at $470,000. It's a
Right.
$470,000 loss.
So last year's fees in the RTA fund can be found on page 193. So last year's receipts was $23 million. So if you take 2% off of that amount, that amounts to 400.
I was just trying to find out what the original deal was. Okay. Not the 2%. That's easy to figure.
Right.
What page was that again?
And we'll come back to the RTA fund. So next I want to highlight the corporate revenue, which is found under the consolidated budget roll-up towards the front of the book, right after the list of funds, starting at pages 1 through 7. And if you'll notice at the bottom of your presentation, it references where you can find. So this is a roll-up of our revenue. And as you can see from the graph, overall revenue remains relatively flat, shows a decline in intergovernmental revenue. I don't know why I'm having trouble with saying that this morning. Due to the state change, and then a slight increase in charges for services. So the roll-up of pages 1 through 7 shows our property taxes, license and permits, intergovernmental revenue, charges for services, fines, forfeits, our interest, and rent and royalties, and then the other category. So those are the category, all of the categories that make up our revenue stream.
Hey, Rashawn, before you go on, question that was posed to Reagan, On page 4 of the corporate revenues, 34290, EMA radio user fees, we thought that was going to be eliminated. The user fees, that they weren't going to charge those any longer? Can we look into that one?
Yeah, we can look into that. Is anyone here from EMA?
I didn't think that we were going to do that. We could check on that.
Okay.
Harold
I'll double check on that with Harold.
Harold had expressed that to us several months ago.
Okay.
It's just one of those, some easy to read sometimes.
86,460, got it. Right. Then the next page, our corporate expenses. That can be found on page 8 through 12, so a couple pages back in the roll-up. If you want to highlight there. And again, here from the graph shown, combined salary and fringes are steady at 80%. Salaries increased by $300,000. Does not include the tentative agreement with ASME. Fringe benefits increased by $900,000 due to the cost of the health insurance, and a small increase in professional and technical services and other purchase services. And again, under the expense account, we have categories that roll up under the expenses as salaries, fringes, supplies, professional and technical services, property services, other purchase services, and our capital outlay. Yes.
Do we have some agreement with the sheriff's department that they're not going to be using any overtime this coming year? I mean,
We don't have an agreement that they will not.
well, what did they
use-
ask for? I mean, I did start looking at it. They've asked for overtime in every department, every group that they have, be it gang or whatever.
In just about
Anticipating.
every department, they've asked for overtime.
Right.
But in past practice, we've granted overtime for the enforcement and the ADF,
Okay.
is what's generally given to the sheriff's
Well,
department.
they've spent $3 million this year so far in 8.5 months, and we're budgeting $1 million.
3 million is not all of the sheriff. There's other departments that
Okay,
accrue.
so what
accrue-
percentage is,
I would say probably the bulk of that is,
90%?
yeah,
Okay.
is the sheriff.
so 90% of $3 million, and we're budgeting $1 million.
Correct, and we haven't,
I know we haven't.
I can
but-
say in the past, we haven't always budgeted exactly what the sheriff has asked for.
Well, we're gonna have to-
And that's something we can look at going forward to budget appropriately for that expense.
One, they need to cut their overtime, because at this pace, we'll be over $4 million.
And that's something that we can sit down with the sheriff to,
And we're gonna
kind of
have to.
discuss.
So we talked about, we added people so that they can reduce it. There's been no reduction that I can see. And now with hopefully some of the judicial changes, hopefully the ADF will be able to pare back over there. But we can't keep budgeting $1 million and they spend $4 million.
Right,
Doesn't make any sense.
correct. So that's a meeting that we could set up with the sheriffs.
If you need 4 or 3 and you budget 1, why, it's a fake budget then?
Well, when we try to balance, and what, part of that is a mechanism to balance the budget, and we balance the budget based on the revenue that we have coming in. So just, and we'll kind of get through this, because I want to point out to the board so that everyone is clear and understand. If you look at the total requested from departments was $212 million. Our revenues are only $197 million. There's no way that we could ever sustain the requests from the department covering $212 million when we only have $197 million coming in. So you have to reduce, some things. That's,
Reducing isn't the numbers. I don't understand.
The other problem really is not the budget. The problem is when you have elected officials overspending their appropriations and just basically saying, I don't have to pay attention to a budget, and forget the budget, it's an appropriation. I personally think it's against the state statutes and law to overspend your appropriations. I don't know how this even exists. So it's, we've talked to the state's attorney about this in the past. Mary, I don't know where you're at there. Oh, there you are. Mary, we've talked about this in the past, but this has really become a problem, that we have elected officials up and down the spectrum here who seem they don't have to pay attention to appropriations, and the money's getting spent out. And in my opinion, Stuffy Blackburn around here, it's up to the auditor to tell us they're outspending their appropriations, which he does not do. So, I don't know, in the past, Mary, so we got to pay the payroll. Well, that's not an answer to me. It's just like, okay, well then, why have a budget at all? Everybody can just do what they want.
okay. I see.
So that's, until we solve that problem, this is going to continue, because they just ignore the appropriation.
I see Bob standing in the back. Bob, did you have a?
Comment today or not on the overtime?
Well, you can, but, and by the way, I'm just talking about people overspending their appropriations. You don't have the authority to spend the money.
Well, we have a jail which we have to staff. These are posts. This is not like the road where I can contract zones and put less people on the road. We've got a certain amount of people that we have to put in there. You did give us 5 people last year, but you have to remember our hours went down in overtime, but the pay raises went up. So that's where your overtime comes in. This year we have to sit down with Rashawn again because I've got 40 people moving into another week vacation at the jail, which is going to be another 2,000 hours, which is about $94,000 in overtime. These are spots that we have to fill. So we have to follow the contract, obviously, and we've got some people with higher seniority. We've got some people taking comp time. And the overtime, that's just what you're seeing there. We have a lot of people taking time and a half for comp time. So when they take the day off, another person takes the comp time. Instead of getting paid 8 hours, they get 12 hours of comp time in their bank. So when they take that off, we have to fill that spot. We had a study, I think in 2000, that the county board was the one who recommended having, and we were short 20 people. So 5 people is not going to plug that hole until you get enough people in there to burn up that comp time and take care of sick time. There is no fluff in my budget when somebody calls in sick, when somebody takes vacation. We're short every day on every shift. I'm more than happy to have you guys come down and sit. We'll make a schedule together. I'll show you what's going on, but there is no overspending a budget. We had a missing child case that cost us $24,000 in overtime this year. There are cases and there are things that we cannot control. Tornadoes, disasters, investigations, homicide investigations. We call investigators out, they work 36 hours straight. There are things that we cannot control.
Well, Bob, let me say this. You cannot overspend your appropriations. You have to do like everyone else. You have to come and ask for an additional appropriation.
Okay, well, the county jail standard says we can't lock these inmates down. If I can do that,
You still have to ask for an additional appropriation, like other other departments have asked. Probably, I get it more from the state's attorney's office, they've asked for some additional appropriations. When they have these special cases, they have to come in and ask for more money. Sheriff Department has to do the same.
We were never told that.
You just can't spend the money if it's not appropriated. You have to come and ask for additional funding.
And we will,
And we're pretty reasonable, by the way.
if you're going to appropriate $1 million, we're going to be in there asking at every finance committee for appropriations.
Well, then that's what you should do.
Then we get to a certain point.
Or I think we should actually come up with a figure that's.
So
more
Bob, it sounds
realistic.
like this is something that, we can discuss, have this discussion kind of offline and with the appropriate people that need to be there.
Where do we get the money from? When they go over the appropriate, what they're supposed to be spending, where do we get the money to pay them? Is it out of contingency or reserve?
Reserves.
I mean, that's why I said we should be including 4 million. If that's the figure, include it. Make it a true statement of the budget, not something that, it just sounds good because it's balanced.
Right.
That's not the way to do things.
And that's something that we will take a look at going forward.
Overtime works great if I could hire a person back once a week, because I don't have to pay the added cost of training, uniforms, plus the added cost of health insurance. But when I'm hiring 3 to 5 people per shift per day at time and a half, you're paying them, more than you would a recruit deputy, because the people who are getting the overtime, it goes by seniority. They're the most senior officers at the highest pay rate. So, I mean, we could sit down and we can show you a way to cut it. Can I guarantee the overtime's gonna go away? No, but I can guarantee you that we can start plugging some of these holes and pay the wages at straight time than paying it at time and a half.
Okay.
How much of the overtime, and it comes from understaffing or not having enough staff? I mean,
Probably 90% is short on shift from the jail.
yeah, well, I do understand it. Well, the other reason I'm asking that question is, we then should hire more people, in which case we would increase the appropriation.
Don't quote me on these numbers, but I believe in.
Right.
Well, we will hire maybe some
But you need to,
additional.
you need to reevaluate that and see if.
Well, the other point I wanted to get to is sometimes, so it's less expensive or more to give a little overtime than it is to hire more people. Because, don't forget, because the cost of an employee is considerable, and you have to do a little bit of that analysis.
Well, I can tell you that on the
To do
day
that.
shift in patrol, I believe, don't quote me on these figures, I remember looking at it yesterday, we hired 12 short on shifts in a 2-week period, which is really nothing. And if you go to the jail, I want to say it was 70 in a 2-week period.
Well, so we need numbers for two things, Bob. We need numbers for current situation, what did it take at the ADF? And when we did the 5 ads, we were doing those 5 ads to cut overtime, I haven't seen it cut.
We cut the hours.
It has? Okay.
That's
It
what I-
says due to the
All right,
wage.
so we need
That's what I've been told, but you had your people
Alright.
jumping to the pay scale
So
plus the
we
pay
we need
raises.
two things. We need to know, how can we affect that more current situation? And what would the current
Right, it's
loads
gonna
need to
start,
be if we
yeah.
shut a pod down?
We get that. I'm also running the numbers to see what this new law, how many inmates we're going to be releasing if the law was into effect today with this new bail reform.
Potentially 200.
I would like to see the data.
So if
to
you
make sure.
can, well, we need to get together with Chief Judge and Darren and talk about those numbers so we can do a scenario for that.
Because that can make-
John, since this is a workshop.
The
Yes.
sheriff's department is low-hanging fruit. That's certainly transparent to us. But you mentioned there are other departments as well that we need to take a look at and that may be something we can go back to the finance department, judicial committees as well. But I know the sheriff's department is low-hanging fruit, and that's so easy for us to take a look at. But since this is a workshop, I'm very much interested in the rest of the show that you have for us
Sure.
today.
Thank you.
Can I ask one question real quickly?
Go ahead.
It turned on finally. You did a staffing study? Am I
The
understanding?
staffing study was done by the county.
Okay, would we be able to see that? Because I've not seen it.
I believe the county board has that. It was in draft form, and I believe it was released. It was never.
Okay. Was never finalized? Okay. I mean, if
It's 'cause
possible,
it's a
I don't know
working-
that I
it's a
ever got
working
that, so I would
document.
like to see it.
I invite each and every one of you, if you want to come see the schedules, we have nothing to hide. Come on down there and I will show, I will show
I actually don't have a
you,
problem.
I'll show you the staffing. There is no fluff, there is nobody who's, we're not generating overtime just to generate overtime, I can tell you that. We look at the overtime at every 2 weeks at our pay periods and we go over stuff. We have it broken down by every work code that's out there for an officer who's going to court, for an officer who's on a holiday, or an officer who's short on shift. We have got 7 people on workman's comp in the patrol division.
Okay,
And to hire that many people back in patrol is nothing.
all right. Thanks, Bob.
Well,
I just want to make a point. If we're going
We're-
to be
we're
doing
going
it, we should
to-
include those higher numbers. That's all I'm saying.
All right, I hear,
You know, to make the point, the initial point is, the county executive's budget is not realistic in the overtime number.
and Ken,
We know that that's not going to be a realistic number. So when we start talking about things that are balanced or not balanced, or, if you know you're going to exceed that amount, then it puts the budget out of balance. That's what you have to look at. You could cut every number and say, well, it's balanced. If you know that's not a realistic number, then it becomes a problem later down the road. So, I think that, so it's a valid point to say, what's the real number? And what happens is, they don't come back, departments aren't coming back and asking for additional appropriation. Their appropriation is overspent, and then we do this cleanup at the end of the year. Then we got to put money here, we got to put money there. So what you're really kind of hoping is that, well, maybe we didn't spend money on whatever, squad cars, and then we put it over in overtime or whatever. It's not a way of, I think, starting the year. So I think it's a point that should be made, and hopefully everybody understands that you can't go around touting something to be balanced when you know you're going to have expenditures that are going to exceed. When you know it, it's one thing when you don't know it, but when you know it, it's another thing. So.
Sean, can we do a roll-up on the sheriff?
yeah,
Because, when you're looking at all the different breakouts and stuff, you have a total at the bottom, but you're not seeing total salaries, total overtime just for the sheriff's group.
that's in their budget, and I can show you where that is after the meeting.
All right, and then the other thing that I was gonna ask was, and I had asked for this last year, for each department to have the personnel, the amount of people in each group at the top of the page.
Oh, okay. Well, we can do that. I can get that so that the final budget will have that
Yeah, but.
on the, you mean in the dividers for each
Yeah, in the
division?
future, we should have that, so people
Yeah.
can look at a department and say, oh, they've got 20 people in there, we got 10 people.
Yeah,
in
we
there.
can make sure that the final budget has that number in there. All right, so for the sake of time, I'm going to move through the workshop, and then any questions, we'll hold those to the end. All right, so moving on to debt obligations. On the next page. So this budget contributes $500,000 to the OPEB fund, dedicates $700,000 in funding for the IMRF accelerated payments, and we've continued to meet our cash reserves target of 22 to 26%. The following page.
And we've always said on the OPEB, well, we'll kind of see what it looks like at the end of the year. And I do think it's probably, prudent. We've been putting in about $1 million a year. I would still like to see that $1 million funding level. So I just want to mention, if we can, at the end of the year.
Okay, and I can,
I think we should at least note that we're going to put $500,000 as a minimum, but, we're still going to look at that $1 million range, if we're able.
if we're, correct, if we're able to. So the reason, or the theory behind the contributing $500,000, we've been accumulating, I think we currently have 12 million in the fund now. We've earned 1.2 million, in interest on that. So with the interest and contributing the 500,000, that's the million, but we definitely will monitor that and
You know, even though we might be, we're looking at 22 to 25% or for reserve, or 26% for reserve. I would, if we're like 26, so we're at the top end of that reserve, then I think it's still prudent and fiscally responsible to even reduce that reserve a little bit to have go in the OPEB fund.
right.
That makes sense.
And we've been hovering around 25%. We haven't actually reached 26%, but if we do, then it would be up to the board to decide what the plan of action.
And or if we have a good year and we don't get into our contingencies and so forth, I think it's, I like us to continue to, we continue to go about $1 million and we continue to have decent returns, that should be a that fund should then stand on its own for retiree benefits, I think, in a few years, 4, 5, 6 years, which then really takes a burden off the county. It's set then, so we're on such a good track, I hate to disrail it a little bit.
And that's only for 2018.
Yes,
So,
yes, I understand.
How much interest did you say, John?
That
1.2.
1.2?
1.2 million.
Okay. The earnings, right.
That fund's a little different, very much like we have at the Forest Reserve. You're able to put it, money into equities and so forth, even though we're extremely conservative. But we do go into the stock market, and we've had a pretty good run. But people should understand you can have a little hiccup too,
Right.
It averages out over a long period of time to be probably that 8 to 10% return area, but but we have had a good year. Yeah.
All right. So moving on to 911 consolidation, as you may all be aware, the consolidation of the dispatch center. We have 4 centers or several centers that will be consolidated into 3 centers. The Will County Sheriff, Romeoville, Lincoln Way, and Eastcom. So the funding for that, or the sheriff's portion, is included in the sheriff's budget under telecommunications, which is on page 103. So there is funding budgeted for the sheriff's portion of that. Mr. Musis?
Here again, I'm going to ask this question, not necessarily the funding, but where in the budget should the funding take place?
So once the agreement has been finalized with the LCC, the plan is to set up a special fund
Okay.
for that, and then those funds would be transferred into that fund.
Because even though we have all these participating communities, the center employees will be employees of Will County.
Correct.
And it'll be under the executive branch of government.
Right, so
I don't know why, for knowing that, why the money wouldn't be moved to the executive portion of the budget.
well, we can't set up this special fund until the agreement is finalized, so I think that's a little premature to do
You think
that
so?
before the,
And we're pretty certain it's going to happen by the end of the year, right? I'm just,
yeah, we could do that for the final budget, but for
okay.
this,
All
yeah.
right, okay.
No, I
So
didn't.
we will have the ability to move it before we adopt the budget?
Yes.
Okay, that's fine, that's fine.
All right. All right. Moving on to our 5-year road and capital plan. So that, the 5-year road and capital plan is found, if you want to flip to the back of the budget, it's right after the debt service, so a few pages from the back. So the section right before the tax levy. So this is about the 4th year that we've planned for the 5-year road and capital plan. This is an ongoing plan for our future and current capital projects. It establishes an annual amount for vehicle and equipment replacement, and also identifies dedicated sources of funding as well. So as you can see here on the 5-year road and capital plan, the top portion is the roads, and then the columns that are listed here are estimated project cost, what we expect to expend in 2017, the 2018 budget appropriation, and then the outlying years behind that. So for our road fund, we're appropriating $32 million a year for the first couple of years, and then you'll see what the amount is outlying. And the sources of funding for that is the RTA fund and county motor fuel fund. And then below that is a list of capital projects that are currently in progress. And of course, the first one is the Will County Public Safety Complex. The next is the Will County Courthouse, and then the Health Department facility. And then below that is the capital equipment replacement cycle and other capital needs. And then below is the funding source of how those projects will be funded.
So on this, on the capital projects, it appears that, we're going to go forward with the animal control, because they've had their own money for this for years,
Okay.
actually.
And I know that was brought up at the county board meeting, so for the final budget, if,
You might want to, because I think we'll start that this year, you might want to put it in there.
okay,
I think the other part of that you might want to reflect on is, I'm assuming that the funds that the animal control have accumulated for this purpose over all these years is part of the cash reserve.
right, so we can,
So we probably need to get a good number for you maybe for the final, because it will affect the cash
are
reserve.
you involved in that, Mike? Okay, so you and I can
Okay.
sit down and,
We're thinking to probably reduce it by 2 million or so, but,
okay.
well, maybe a little bit more, because there's some other costs that we.
Right, right.
Okay, so you and I can kind of sit down and talk about that. Okay. And then on the following page, it just shows the long-range transportation plan and basically what has been expended from the RTA fund as far as road projects. And you'll note that they've been averaging about 21 million a year. The graph shows, the first 3 or 4 years where the road bonds were issued, they were spending a little bit more, and then 2015 and 16 is what has actually been spent, and I think that number is a little low due to delay in projects and other factors. And the RTA fund can be found on page 221 of your budget book, or page 192 and 193. And also, right behind that is the County Motor Fuel Fund, or MFT, which is found on page 196 and 197. So you can see those expenses there. Okay. Also coming up is the Weber Road and I-55 interchange. We're expecting that, or Jeff Ronaldson has informed us that the IDOT bid letting for that project is expected in January of 2018. We know it's a $45 million cost to the county. So we have taken that into consideration, so hopefully The bid letting will happen in January, and that date will not be pushed back.
Sean, did you say that the revenue?
RTA, that line item includes the 2% fee
Yes.
already?
Yeah, the projection for 18, we've realized the 2%.
Okay.
And then moving on to the next page, the capital projects that are in progress. The public safety complex, the courthouse, which that process will begin the beginning of 2018, and then the health department, which will come after that. So the funding for that can be found on page 363, and that's the Building Will Fund, 314. And there's 84.5 million appropriated for 2018, based on the expenses we will incur for 18.
You'll say on the capital projects process.
The issued $175 million bond says includes funds for these projects. Well, but that's not all the funds for those projects yet. We will need
No, it's not
additional
all the funds for
Right.
the projects. We budgeted 93.9 million for 17, where appropriated, but no, we haven't expended all of those funds. So I think 18, we'll probably expend a bulk of those funds.
Right.
And then going forward, we'll probably need to look at,
Right. Just so everybody doesn't think that 175 covers
No.
all three of those projects.
yes. Thanks for pointing that out. Yes,
Million, 475.
hopefully we can recapture that.
Yeah.
Similar, again. All right. And then the last couple of pages, or the next few pages, is the levy. And that can be found on the last page of your book, budget book. So the levy proposal is 2.1 million in new property and 1 million in CPI, giving a total increase of 3.1 million. Of that 3.1 million, 2.2 million will go into the corporate fund. 600,000 of that will go into the capital fund, and then the remaining 300,000 will be allocated to the facilities replacement fund for our long-term maintenance plan, FICA and IMRF. The expected increase in the EAV. The EAV is going up, and that's due to the increase in the property values. So we've seen with the increase in the property values, that's driving the rate down a little bit. So the 2017 tax rate with that proposal would be 0.6000%. Which is 1.5% lower than the previous year's rate, 2016 tax rate of 0.6147. So new property was 2.1 million, and then CPI, the total of that was 2.55 million this year. The CPI rate was about 2.1%. Which was pretty high. Right. And then on the final page here, of the levy, there was a proposal of using the remaining PBC levy and reallocating that to the health department. So in past years, the PBC levy was about 4 million. We consolidated the maintenance staff under the county executive. So that levy was reduced last year into the corporate fund, and the remaining amount that was left with the PBC was $500,000. I think there was a conversation that we couldn't take those funds or reallocate those funds twice because they were to be used for the building will debt service. We have been using those funds that were previously rolled up into the corporate fund from the prior PBC levy. That has been dedicated to the building will. So this is only the remaining $500,000 that's was left in the PBC levy. We're proposing to reallocate only $499,000 of that, leaving $1,000 in the PBC levy to the health department.
Comment, I'd like to make a comment here.
Sure.
Well, I'm glad to see the 497,000 because my recollection was it was initially said 2 million would be given, or $1 million would be given to the health department levy. But let me say, even the 499,000, that money has gone elsewhere already. Let me point out that the only operational part of that levy that went to the Public Building Commission was one full-time employee and 2 part-time employees. Everything else that was there was to do some cleanup on some payments that were due to vendors, basically contractors, which was really a county obligation. In the consolidation, even though it's going to have positive long-range effects, the initial cost just shifts to the county. And that cost was greater than the Public Building Commission operation. So to consolidate the staffs and so forth became an expense of the county. We just shifted the cost here. I think that would absolutely chew up most of that 499,000. I think if you said there was a number of maybe 150,000, maybe that could be argued. But even 499,000, the money came back. The cost came back to the county. It didn't go away. The expense of the Public Building Commission didn't go away. And I know you have something here about the juvenile detention and the funding that's still there. The Public Building Commission was sending the money back to the county, and still does on the juvenile detention center. They send a check to the county for those employees.
Correct.
Some of the same thing occurred here, not necessarily employees. The transition had taken place, but the expense was there was some outstanding invoices that was taken care of, which was a capital. That was it's like taking out of the capital fund. I do not believe there's 1 penny left of that levy that where the expense hasn't shifted over to the county. We can't act like it doesn't exist. The county's picking up those costs. For example, when the Public Building Commission had a larger levy, say it was a $2 million levy, well, they paid all the utilities. There's a lot of expenses that don't go away. They just come over here.
Correct.
So it's just somewhere else. The expenses are somewhere else in our corporate fund, not as identifiable, because it could be maintenance, it could be utilities, it could be a whole host of things. So what I'm saying is I don't believe that there's 499,000 left in that levy. If you were going to make an argument, the only thing that's left in the levy is whatever the cost of the employees left over at the Public Building Commission, which is the 2 full-time equivalency employees. Everything else,
correct. So
everything else, the expense has been picked up over here in the corporate fund.
Right.
So now when you're asking, not you, but when this board is asked to considering raising the tax levy for the health department, we're just shorting ourselves of expenses we have now taken on. So I'm just saying that I don't believe this number
I
is a
think,
realistic number because the expenses just went from this pot to this pot.
but we've
So,
already,
all within the corporate fund.
we've already absorbed those costs from bringing that
Well, you
into
haven't
the
absorbed
corporate
all of
fund
it yet.
last year.
You're going to absorb the, juvenile detention once the Public Building Commission, once the trust is dissolved, there'll be no more checks coming from the Public Building Commission. How much are the checks that come from the Public Building Commission for maintenance currently? Do you know?
They're about $500,000.
Oh, there you go.
Well,
I'm just saying that.
but this is not the juvenile detention. That was for.
No, but it's
the-
all, but the corporate levy is going to have to make up the $500,000 difference because they're no longer going to be getting the funding through the trust that the Public Building Commission currently has. Now, I know there's $4 million, well, I think it'll be less by the time it's done, but, there's money that's coming over from the
But
Public
can you
Building
mix?
Commission.
Can you mix the two?
Well, currently, you were using that for maintenance.
not
The Public
not
Building Commission is sending a check.
But that was coming out of the trust. That the funds
Yeah.
for that is coming out of the trust account. So that's
Now you're going to,
that has nothing to do with the levy. though.
sure it does, because the corporate fund now is going to have to pick up the $500,000 that the trust has been paying. How are you going to pick up that cost? You no longer have that revenue stream to pay for those employees and those expenses, which, by the way, go beyond employees. It's the electric, it's all the gas and so forth. So currently, the trust is paying for that. Once the trust is dissolved,
It would all come up to the corporate.
it'll go to
the
the
corporate fund.
corporate. So that's the $500,000 here.
Well, it's ultimately up to the board to decide.
But I'm saying this is, I'll tell the board, this is not a number. You're going to have to pick up a $500,000 that's currently being paid out of the trust for the Juvenile Detention Center, and will be paid out. That money will go into a capital fund or long-term maintenance. I prefer long-term maintenance fund. We'll make a determination where that money's going to go, but the corporate fund's going to have to pick
Yeah,
up
that's what I
another
said.
$500,000 in expenses that's being paid by the trust.
So Jim, we'll look at that next week.
It's fine. I'm just pointing out
Yeah.
that it's easy to overlook how things have worked currently because it's relatively new. When the Public Building Commission, when the maintenance departments were merged, certainly the Public Building Commission paid some out of that larger levy they got the prior year, sent a check over for the maintenance. But the juvenile detention, because it is a fund, separate fund, and because we have a partner there in Kankakee, and they have to pay their portion, the maintenance, the employees, and I don't know who are paid by that, including, I believe, probably Jim Ellis, who's
Jim-
a supervisor, probably is paid out of that fund. I don't know for sure, but I'm just saying even the supervisor is paid from there. So I'm saying you have to make up the $500,000 in the corporate fund. Because just look at it like you're losing that revenue stream. It doesn't exist anymore. So to say you're going to reallocate part of the corporate fund to a different levy, well, then that shorts us to a day-to-day operation.
So that's something we can.
I mean,
look
let's
at,
look
yeah.
at it. I mean,
Look at, and it's
I
a
would say how to look
proposal.
at it.
It's a proposal.
I would say that, there could be, there is a cost to the Public Building Commission that I think we save, but it basically is just that administrative staff. So I don't think that exceeds $150,000. So, and I think you could look at that, for sure. You know, even if you increase the levy to the health department a little bit, I don't think it'd be this much. That's all. Okay?
Nick, you had a comment?
Well, you know, there's a lot of numbers flowing around here, and I think this is worth digging into once and
Right.
for all. But at the end of the day, all the money, corporate and PBC, which is under the corporate, it's all part of the same levy. It all starts with the county. The county sets the levy. The PBC doesn't set their own levy. And there has been a lot of confusion because we levy money, we send it to the PBC, they send it back to us to pay for the employees that were consolidated that this board agreed to. So at some point, you start throwing enough numbers around, it is confusing to where you don't even understand it. But the fact is, there's employees there right now who are being paid. So if by some chance it's less than $500,000, which we will determine once and for all, so everybody agrees what the
Right.
dollar amount is. But there's employees there now that once all the bills are paid and all the projects that already had began, there is no work for them to do. And the county executive referenced this in his speech, that the projects are completed. This board agreed to move the maintenance workers back under the executive branch. They also moved all the capital project oversight under the Capital Improvements Committee, which has been a very positive thing. I think everybody would agree. And so there's really no purpose to have an oversight board that has no projects to oversee. So I'm hoping, and I think the county executive hopes, that we can agree that the decisions have been made. The projects, the courthouse, the public safety complex, probably the health department, now we're going to do animal control, is all going to be done here, not at the PBC. So what's the problem with eliminating that board and whatever money be shifted back for other more useful purposes, number one. And number two, the number of $2 million was never stated as far as the levy for the PBC. That's one-time money that's in a trust that's governed by a trustee. That money can come back. $2 million of it was proposed to come back to the capital fund, and whatever's left after all the bills are paid could be sent to the long-term replacement fund, which I think everybody agrees also is a good practice. But the one other thing I just mentioned quickly, and I'll wrap up, is we had a meeting last week, I guess it was last Friday, with Kankakee, and this is the unfortunate thing about this whole process, is new information keeps rolling out, is it was presented previously both at a PBC meeting and I think at board meetings that Kankakee was not paying all their bills. That's not entirely true. They owe us money for the operation for the detention officers and things like that, but according to the PBC staff, the money that was supposed to be paid in an annual payment for the O&M has been withdrawn from the trust. So they have been paying some of their bills, and at the end of this, if we can come to a conclusion in this, we may have some money that we're going to say, this is yours, but we're going to apply it to either the outstanding debt you owe us at the River Valley for the operations of the guards and things like that. But I know that's more numbers, but we will spell that all out for the board so that you know what's going forward. But I don't know why we wouldn't want to close down the PBC and move the money for more useful purposes. If it's $150,000 or $500,000, but they proposed a budget that was certified by the PBC, and it was about $500,000 they asked for this year. So I'm not sure what it was for.
Before they actually knew exactly what their fate was.
That was at the same meeting
The
with
Public
Nicole.
Billing Commission staff has been informed their last days will be November 30th. So the staff is already gone, Nick, which I thought you were aware of, but you want to overstate it again. You know, the Public Billing Commission may be dormant. It's not going to go away. That board will still be there. And if the county or any other agency within the county or Joliet decides they're going to use the Public Billing Commission, they can. We are not in the Public Billing Commission alone. It's with Joliet. Has Joliet told you, Nick, they want to get rid of it? I'm just asking. You go on about getting rid of the Public Billing Commission, so, it's like, it's just not that easy to do.
The county executive has talked to the mayor of Joliet, and he is supportive of dissolving the PBC. He has no intention of using it, and he said he's supportive.
Well, he's never informed this board of that.
Well, we'll get a
I mean, you've been on a quest, I know I've said this before. You in the county executive seem to think that somehow eliminating the Public Building Commission is a big feather in your cap. It is not. It is not. It's not reducing anything.
Okay, I don't want this to turn
They're used when we
into,
decide to use them.
I don't want
The expense
this-
just goes somewhere else.
Jim, I don't want this to turn into
You
a,
know? Well, you know what, I get tired of the same old thing, like you're acting like you're really doing something by eliminating the Public Building Commission, and you're not. Because the expense just came to the county. You didn't eliminate any expense. And when you merged the staffs, there was big pay increases that went to everybody. Not big, but there was pay increases that went to everybody. And we didn't save one dime. So you just give this smoke and mirrors. I get tired of it, that's all. Everything is some kind of, you went on about stuff that had nothing to do with the budget. I was talking about the levy. You want to, the only thing that's getting eliminated there is probably about 150,000, probably less, in employee costs. That's it.
okay. So
Okay.
it sounds like it's something that needs to be looked into further.
Yeah.
Right. We can't
Okay.
leave that 499.
Yeah. Okay. That concludes the presentation. The other thing I just wanted to address, and I know, Mike, we had mentioned, this had come up before, is the increase in the health insurance costs, an estimated $2.3 million. With the, just to explain, with the approval of the new healthcare insurance plan that we just approved, that increase has significantly decreased to about 150,000. No, it's not the 2.3. The 2.3 was the original plan if we had not made any changes to the healthcare plan. So Bruce Tidwell gave me new renewal numbers based on the new plan that we adopted, in which the employees always contribute, which tightens that gap anyway. So that new number is 856,000. Right. And just for a point of reference, we set a number per FTE, and we have, not fallen short in previous years in that expense line. So we're pretty confident that we won't have a shortfall going forward in 2018 as well.
Healthcare.
So
What number's in there?
There's an increase in that expense line of 900,000.
900.
Yes,
So we're pretty much
So we're-
break even with the reality
yes.
of it.
Yes.
So we really shouldn't have to make any changes budget-wise, because we've already accounted for exactly what it's going to cost us.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. If there's any other questions, Steve?
Yeah, I don't know if the staff does this or not, but does anyone monitor the last quarter of spending for each of the departments?
Yeah,
So
that's-
that, I'm looking at, are they spending all the money in their budget because they can in the last quarter?
That's my responsibility as budget director. I monitor that and take a look to see where departments are at year end.
I mean, are you making sure that they don't go out and buy a bunch of stuff because they got leftover money?
Once they
No.
get the appropriation,
Once, yeah,
they're able and they can spend.
right. So my job is to make sure they don't go over.
I'm just concerned that they spend it because they can. Like you just, I don't want to see money just being spent because.
Yeah.
That's really.
Rashad, can I also get that, since we're going to do a personnel sheet, just to
For
by
each
group,
division.
so individual, and then can you give me the per person healthcare number?
Sure.
Whether it's
For
18
each, for each,
550 or whatever it is.
okay.
So, I mean, that's an easy way for me to look at personnel too, just make sure that's matching up.
Got it. Judy?
Yeah, I would just like to put it out there that, back to what Jim Mooses and Nick were talking about with the consolidation is, consolidation does seem like a very nice term. We want to consolidate governments, but I would like to know, what was the actual cost to consolidate the PBC in? I know the goal is that these maintenance employees can work anywhere. We're not going to see that as an immediate savings. I know it wasn't a savings, it was a cost. I'd like to know, what is the cost that that consolidation cost us? And then in the future, if we talk about consolidating, I think it's important, we need to know the cost up front, because we're not always given that dollar value. We find out, say, hey, it's a great idea, let's consolidate, but then afterwards, we find out what the cost was. So I think we need to really take that question up front from now on and ask that question, much in terms to, in my opinion, any contract we make with the union, we're saying we'll do this and that, but we don't ever know the costs up front. So we agree that it seems like it's a great idea to do this or whatever, but then what is the actual cost that it's going to cost us, and then how do we pay for that?
Okay.
And we can look at some of that, I mean,
Contracts, certainly, if, you're being paid $1 and we have to go to $1.10 because that's what the other ones get, we can look at that. The hard part is some of it is, are we going to lose an individual because we're consolidating? And sometimes we don't know until they put that together. But you're right, we need to get as much as we can on the consolidation so we aren't consolidating ourselves into a higher cost. But there should be some advantages too. One of the advantages, we don't have to have the PBC running that group that was running before, so
Okay.
there's a savings in that respect a little bit.
Nick wanted to respond.
Judy, we can get you as exact a number as we can, but the issue with consolidation of the PBC maintenance employees into the executive branch was, when they were at PBC, they were non-union employees, but they were paid significantly higher, which was determined by the PBC board, not the county board. When they came and consolidated as part of the impact bargaining, our employees who were doing virtually the same job were brought up to their salary amount rather than brought down, the PBC employees, and that was just, we may not like it, but that's what happened. That's why there was salary increases, because all the people who take care of this building and other non-courthouse River Valley were paid significantly less. But I think you bring up an important point about knowing beforehand, because the practice has been for 6 or 7 years probably that this county executive, county board have agreed that we're not going to put a line item for union step increases or COLAs. That we used to do that. When I first started here, we had a line for that. So it was budgeted for and figured into the calculation. We stopped doing that. And it's been said repeatedly by leaders on the county board that we are approving the contracts, we're not approving more money. So I can tell you from at least the executive branch, and I'm sure the elected officials can say the same thing, is we've managed to make it work. I mean, and that's been the expectation of the board, is you live within your budget. So if you have to delay hires or not fill vacancies, and we've done that in our office, and I know a lot of the elected officials have delayed hires, but that's the way these budgets have worked. If now we want to go back to that, that's kind of a change of practice, but I don't think it's a bad thing. It's true budgeting, but like the contracts weren't just the 1% COLA. We've always said it's the COLA plus the step. So the step is 2.5% on average, plus the COLA, so 3.5%, 4.5%. We end at 5.5% at the end of this contract, which is, for most people in the public, that's a huge increase. But we bought those health care savings that Mike and Rashawn were just talking about, and that was the trade-off. And believe me, among the management people who were in those negotiations, that was a hard pill to swallow, because that's all the union employees are getting, 3.5%, 4.5%. The management people, I'm not going to say they haven't had any increases, but they've had nominal increases because there's no money left in the budget. So all the managers who are supervising those union employees aren't getting increases. They're in fact taking a pay cut this year, and a lot of people are going to say, good. But they're paying for the health care costs, especially the ones at the top, are going to pay more because our health plan is salary driven. So if you're at the top, if you're a manager of a department, you're going to pay significantly more than the clerk or anybody else who's making less than $30,000, $40,000. So
I welcome a real conversation about the real numbers, because we're not, I mean, I don't think we should blow up the budget, but we've not budgeted for step and salary increases for years. That might be the wrong way to go. But if you budget for that, then we're going to have significant layoffs to cover all those increases. And I don't know that that's necessary, because we've managed, for better or worse, for the last number of years. At some point, it's going to come to an end, because there's only so many commodities you can cut and whatever. That's why you see our personnel budget as a percentage of the corporate budget is increasing, because we've cut out everything else. I mean, it's mostly just staff is what we're paying for. So we'll try to get you a hard number, though, what that cost was for the transfer. And the other thing about that is we are adding buildings. We haven't added a ton of maintenance staff. Those staff, the idea was they're going to cover more buildings with the same number of staff.
Right.
At some point, we may have to add a few when we add the courthouse and other buildings, depending if we get rid of the old courthouse, but.
Don had his hand up.
It just seems that by dissolving the Public Building Commission, that it appears that that's, for the county board, a more transparent and better process. I mean, you talk about checks going back and forth between the two entities, the Public Building Commission making decisions on their own with respect to costs, not the county board. When this comes under the umbrella of the county, you'll have a more hands-on, open approach, and there should be some savings there. There should be. On the other side of the coin, I know this is a workshop, but to me, I look at the health department levy, I looked at your health department levy in 2014, it's flat for 3 years. We had this discussion the other day about mental health services in the state of Illinois and not, you know, the cuts to the counties and so forth. For some of our constituents, these mental health services are important. This is a place where they can go and they need this. So I think, you know, when you look at that health department levy, look hard at it, because if you need to make an increase, that's a place that deserves it, and that's my opinion.
Thank you, Mr. Gould.
You're welcome.
Judy, one
Yeah,
last.
so I do want to piggyback on what Don said is, I've gone to the health department, sat down and looked at all the different ways, the flow chart of the health department, the number of employees, how many cuts we've had, and that the residents that we serve there are those who do not have insurance, and there are a group of people who fall into that category. And my thought with that is exactly the same. We need to really take a hard look at that, because I think if we are able to provide those individuals with the mental health needs that mental health care that they need, it makes sense, and it's going to cost us less than if they end up with Bob Control's ADF.
Right.
So the overall cost should be less if we continue to provide the services that are needed there. So that's something we need to.
On the other hand, we heard it a week ago during legislative, Senator McGuire has told us that the state is now picking that up. The state has just opened a new mental health facility here in Joliet. They are using the money that they're taking away from us, basically, to create more mental health facilities and services. They've taken away the grants from us that provide those services. So they're basically telling us to start getting more out of the business. That's what they're doing by taking the money and using it to provide the health services. They're stopping the grants to us.
These are the same geniuses that said, let's close Tinley Park and send people to Elgin in Chicago.
Well, I'm
Right?
not
I mean,
saying.
come on, right?
I'm
That's
not,
the same
I'm not
people.
saying they're geniuses, I'm just saying,
Now you're saying, oh, well, no, they'll pay for it, when for years they're not paying for it.
but they just opened a new facility. But the point is, they're taking our money away in our grants for those programs to do the services that they feel are necessary.
But that's for someone who's been tried and convicted, right? Am I right or wrong? That you go to a juvenile, not juvenile, you go to an adult now, correctional center to receive mental health. What we're talking about is just a citizen of Will County who needs mental health services, right? They haven't been convicted or in the prison system for anything. That's a totally apples and oranges. That's
I
two totally
understand.
different mental health
But they've
systems.
taken away the money that we were using that for,
But
to
that's
provide
my-
whatever
but-
services they decide to provide.
You're making my
Sure.
point. They take our money away, and then our levy's flat for 3 consecutive years, and yet we have to do more because the state doesn't.
Well, but they're not
fund the
mandating,
county.
they're not mandating us to do that.
I understand that.
They're
but
not
I just-
mandating to do that. So we have to look at, do we?
They're not mandating it, that's why they're taking it away. Anything that's not mandated, they're taking piece by piece.
But we have to decide if those services are supposed to be provided by the county or other services that are out there.
We'll have that discussion.
Yeah.
I know where I'm at.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
I just wanted to make a point that if you multiply the amount of taxes you pay for your property tax out over 20 years, and then ask yourself, is the state of Illinois pushing people out of here with the cost of increased taxes or not? You almost pay for your house in taxes in 20 years. A lot of people, depends where you live. But in our area, in Homer, in 20 years, a lot of people already bought their house with the taxes that they paid. So, when we talk about the state in their infinite wisdom won't address spending, so now they're gonna take all this money that we need for health care and then tell us, well, don't do it. Or find a way, tax your people some more. So what do? We tax, in order to keep the health department thriving the way it should be, because the state's taking our money. Now, what do? We raise taxes, and then the people that live in our districts have a heart attack because they can't afford to live there anymore? I mean, there's got to be some kind of consistency with government. And if the state wants to do that, we have to find ways to go after the state to get our money back. And that's why I brought up an origination fee earlier. But if we don't do nothing, all that's going to happen is we're going to end up, maybe not this year or next year, we're going to have to raise our taxes a whole lot. And when that happens, then what? How many people in your neighborhood's going to have to move? I just had it with
All right,
the whole
yeah.
idea of,
yeah.
you want to,
That's-
we're
yeah,
talking
that's a-
about health
that's a
department, that's
Springfield
important, and then we move on to this other idea of who pays for it.
Right. Well, that concludes my presentation. I would welcome anyone, if you have any further questions, you can send a list of your questions to the county board staff. If anyone would like to meet with me, I am available to meet with anyone to discuss the budget one-on-one. But thank you for the comments. I appreciate it, and I think this was a great
And just so
meeting.